Hello, I'm Robert Jones, and today we're going to continue with our course, The Top 25 Reformers. This would be Protestant Reformers of the 16th century. We've reached number 9, who is a gentleman named Erasmus. Now, Erasmus never became a Protestant, but he certainly seemed to have a lot of impact on the Reformation. He's born around 1466, probably in Rotterdam, Netherlands. At age 9, he attends Latin school at Deventer in the Netherlands. 1483, the bubonic plague kills both his mother and father. 1492, he becomes an Augustinian priest, and soon after he becomes secretary to the Bishop of Cambrai, Henry of Bergerac. 1494 to 1536, in other words, most of his life, he's a traveling scholar. 1495, he attends the University of Paris in the Collège de Montaigu. 1501, he writes his Handbook of a Christian Knight, calls for renewed focus on the Church Fathers and the Bible. And certainly throughout his career, Erasmus was very much opposed to extraneous sources to the Bible, superstitions and that sort of thing that were in the Catholic Church. 1502, he publishes his Adages, a collection of sayings from classical literature translated into Latin. 1505, he becomes a Doctor of Divinity at Turin University. 1510 to 1515, he becomes the Lady Margaret Professor of Divinity at Queen's College in Cambridge. So here we have him appearing in England. 1512, he begins to work on a Latin and Greek New Testament. The Greek part was based on Byzantine versions. 1516, he writes his Education of a Christian Prince, dedicated to the future Charles V, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. 1517, he supports the creation of the Collegium Trilingue for the study of Hebrew, Latin, and Greek at the University in Louvain, Belgium. 1509, he writes The Praise of Folly, a satire on the Western Church and in Europe. This is perhaps his most famous work. 1514, he writes my favorite work of Erasmus, which is Julius Excluded from Heaven. He writes it anonymously, and it's a dialogue between the Pope Julius II and St. Peter, as Julius tries to get past St. Peter at the gate and into heaven. 1516, he publishes his Greek New Testament. 1517, he exchanges letters with Martin Luther on various topics, including predestination versus free will, Erasmus taking the free will viewpoint. 1519, the second edition of his Greek Bible is produced. This would be used by Martin Luther for his German translation of the Bible. In 1522, he published the third edition of his Greek Bible, possibly used by Tyndale for his English translation, later used in Geneva under John Calvin to publish the Genevan Bible. 1524, he criticized Luther's view of free will in his Free Will Conferral, other ways you could translate that. 1525, Luther publishes On the Bondage of the Will as a reply to Erasmus' book. 1529, he writes an epistle against those who falsely boast they are evangelicals, and he moves to the imperial town of Freiburg im Breisgau. In 1533, he writes his explanation of the Apostles' Creed. 1536, he dies in Basel, Switzerland, from dysentery. 1544, he is excommunicated, of course, after his death. And in the 1560s, he's criticized by the Catholic Counter-Reformation for having, quote, laid the egg that hatched the Reformation. All of his books are placed on the Index of Prohibited Books by Pope Paul IV. 1622, a bronze statue of Erasmus is erected in Rotterdam. He was an important influence on the Reformation. He was an early and vociferous critic of the excesses of the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. However, he remained a Catholic until the day he died. He never became a Protestant. He never became a follower of Luther or Zwingli or Calvin. Among his views and beliefs, he mocked what he referred to as Catholic superstitions, including the veneration of the saints. He called shrines and miracles and relics bugbears of superstition. He criticized the sale of indulgences. He criticized the wealth, corruption, and nepotism of the papacy and the papal hierarchy. He criticized the unchecked power of the papacy. He attacked lax practices of monks in the monastery. And he believed in a return to a focus on the church fathers and the Bible. And he believed in adult baptism by immersion. He wrote a number of extremely satirical tracts, including a play called JULIUS EXCLU, depicting a noted Pope Julius II being denied entrance to heaven by St. Peter. The fact that he wasn't excommunicated until after his death is a credit to a key factor. He kept his criticisms within the clerical community. Here's an excerpt from JULIUS EXCLU. Peter says, "If secular laws allow for a king who rules his land badly to be not only deposed but executed, why should the church be so helpless that it must put up with a pope who ruins everything instead of expelling him as a public nuisance?" Julius responds, "If the pope is to be corrected, it ought to be by a council. But against the will of the pope, a council can't be called. Otherwise, it would be a mere convention, not a proper council. Even if it were called, it couldn't issue any decrees if the pope objected. And finally, my last offense is absolute power, of which the pope possesses more, all by himself, than an entire council. In short, the pope can't be removed from office for any crime whatever." Peter says, "Not for homicide." Julius says, "Not for parricide." Peter says, "Not for fornication." Julius says, "Ridiculous, not even for incest." Peter says, "Not for the sin of simony." Julius says, "Not for 600 such sins." Peter says, "Not for poisoning someone." Julius says, "Not even for sacrilege." Peter says, "Not for blasphemy." Julius says, "No, I say." Peter says, "Not for all these crimes poured together in a single sewer of a man." Julius says, "Add, if you like, the names of 600 other vices, each one worse than any of these, and still the Pope cannot be removed from his throne for any such reasons." Well, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Erasmus published this tract anonymously. You can see why, but you can also see why the Catholic hierarchy would not be pleased with him when it finally became evident that Erasmus had indeed written it. Here's an excerpt from The Praise of Folly, perhaps his most famous book. Certainly his most famous phrase comes up in this. "The next to be placed among the regiment of fools are such as make a trade of telling or inquiring after incredible stories of miracles and prodigies. Never doubting that a lie will choke them, they will muster up 1,000 several strange relations of spirits, ghosts, apparitions, raising of the devil, and such like bugbears of superstition, which the further they are from being probably true, the more greedily they are swallowed, and the more devoutly believed. And these absurdities do not bring an empty pleasure or cheap diversion, but they are a good trade, and procure a comfortable income to such priests and friars as by this craft get their gain. To these again are nearly related such others as attribute strange virtues to the shrines and images of saints and martyrs, and so would make their credulous postulants believe that if they pay their devotion to St. Christopher in the morning, they will be guarded and secured the day following from all dangers and misfortune. And you see there's some similarity to Martin Luther speaking out against indulgences in this tract. He's speaking out against priests and friars who are making money by stoking the superstitions of the populace. And that's our look at Erasmus.